Yeah, we'll get started. I'm sure he'll join, and we have a Mishnah in a few minutes, so it's a good like opening scene. Okay, so we are on Daf Yud Tet Amabet, 4 lines from the bottom, the first wide line. Stan, do you have a Gemara? I don't know if you have it or not.
No, but I'll follow along.
Okay, well, so I'll try. Tell me if you get stuck. Okay. So Yativ Rav Menashe Bar Zvid Kamed Rav Huna. Rav Menashe Bar Zvid sat in front of Rav Huna, and he said, "This is a common phrase to begin a discussion." My time of Rabbi Shimon. What's the reason for Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon's opinion, which we quoted at length yesterday, was that if you have a brother who's born after the death of the first brother, so recall Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Reuven is married and dies, and after Shimon marries Reuven's widow, right, does Yibam, Levi is born. So what Rabbi Shimon said is that because Levi is born after Shimon married Reuven's widow, it's not Reuven's widow anymore, right? It's Shimon's wife. And then when Shimon dies, it becomes Shimon's widow, and therefore Levi can marry her, the new brother. Hanan, we just got started. We are 4 lines from the bottom. So my time of Rabbi Shimon, what is the rationale for Rabbi Shimon who says that Eshet Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, who was born after the Shimon did Yibam to Reuven, is allowed to marry the widow of Reuven? Says, well, what do you mean? What's the reason? Kida Amar Taima. Rabbi Shimon said his reason. Since when he was born, Levi was born, she was permitted to him because she was married already to Shimon. V'lo amda lav shachat bisor. She never was prohibited to him. Says, well, you're right. What he meant was the opposite. On my time of D'Rabbanan, why would anyone argue with that? Again, the case is Reuven died. He left his widow to Shimon. Shimon does Yibam, and then Levi is born afterwards. So if Levi is born afterwards, what's the rationale to say that Levi is prohibited to the widow of Reuven? Amar Kra says the Rabbanan, 2 lines in the bottom, it says, V'lakacha lo li'isha, you should take her, right? The brother takes her as a wife, v'yibma, and he does yibam. What we learn from that extra word, it's not exactly the extra word, but let's just say the word v'yibma is extra, is that although Shimon married the wife, the widow of Reuven, she's still called a Yevamot. That her designation is that she, for life, is going to be the Yevamot of Reuven, and now the wife of Shimon, but she doesn't lose that status of her connection to Reuven. And it's based on a pasuk. Adayin yibumim harishonim aleha. The first yibum is still it's her status. So in some ways, she's still connected to Reuven, who's long dead, right? And since Levi and Reuven were not alive at the same time, there's an element of Eshet Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, a wife of a brother in which you didn't share the same world. Says Gemara, well, I don't get it. What about the following Mishnah? Elahaditznan, we're going to have a Mishnah that says, Kansa, that if the brother does Yibam, like he's supposed to, Harehi Kishto L'chol Davar, right? The wife, again, Reuven dies, Shimon, regular case, Shimon marries, it's his wife for everything. Mamar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Melamed, top of Daf Chaf now, this teaches us, Shemikarsha beget, that now when if Shimon wants to break up this marriage, he gives her a get, like any other marriage. And Machsira, he can even remarry her after that get. Like someone asked this yesterday, right? So you see that once Shimon marries her, it's Shimon's wife, and there's no connection to Reuven anymore. Because if there was a connection to Reuven, you couldn't remarry Reuven's ex-wife or Reuven's widow, right? Because it's a Eshetach. Says the Gemara, well, Hatam Nami Lema Yevamot Adayin B'mim Rishon Maleh. Why don't you say that you can't divorce her? You need to do chalitza, tibay chalitza. That meaning for life, she's still connected to Reuven. And if you ever want to free her to the world, you have to not only divorce her, but also do chalitza. This is where, well, that's different. Kashani hatam damakra v'lakcha lo li'isha. Torah says you take her as your wife, meaning once you marry her, she's your wife for all issues. Kivan shelakcha nasit ki ishto lechol davar. So again, it says, well, now you have a contradiction. First, you called her that she's still the Yevamot of Reuven. Then you're saying once Shimon marries her, it's Shimon's wife. So which one is it? Is she, again, this is a very interesting question of what happens in Yibum, right? She was married to Reuven. Shimon's required to marry her to sort of keep his brother's name alive. But is she still known? What's her connection to Reuven, right? And what's her connection to Shimon? Is she the wife of Shimon in all regards? Or is she partially, or also the widow or the Yevamot of Reuven? Says the Gemara, "Hachi hachanami." So say the same thing here. And finally, we get to the question. Where do you say? And obviously, one pasuk is calling her still the Yevamot. One pasuk is calling her the Eshet, the wife of Shimon. How do you know in which circumstance to look at which pasuk? Mara ita. What gives you, what logically, where do you see to apply one designation in one situation and one in another situation? Says the Gemara, well, mistavra, we use this based on thought, on svara. It's logical that shadi hetera a hetera, the shadi isura a isura, that you apply heter, meaning when you say a person can marry her, which is Shimon, then he becomes hers, she becomes his for all regard. She's Eshet Shimon in every way. If he divorces her, he can remarry. But the brother Levi, who is prohibited to her potentially because he was not in the same world as her, then that's where you apply the Isur in that case. So you basically depends on context. With Rabbi Shimon, now what about according to Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon said, since when Levi was born, he found that she was permitted to him because she's married to Shimon, right? Says the Gemara, well, why don't you ask the same thing about Elamiata? According to Rabbi Shimon's logic, if at the time you were born, there was no prohibition, so therefore you can do Yibam. What about, where am I? What about Isur Achoto? Sorry. What about Elamiata Achoto Mi Imo? Right? Let's say, so again, we get these complicated situations. We have two brothers, right? Reuven and Shimon. Shimon has a sister that from his mother. So Shimon has a sister, a half sister maybe, that does not share any genetics with Reuven, right? It's not from the father, not from the mother. So Reuven and Shimon share a father. Shimon and Leah, we'll call her, I don't know, share a mother, right? So it's Shimon's sister, and she goes ahead and marries Reuven, right?
So they're Shimon and Reuven. They're full brothers. No, they're half brothers.
Well, they're half brothers. So they don't share a mother. They share a father. Remember, for Yibam, the only thing that matters is the father. For other relations, both matter. Okay? So Reuven and Shimon share a father. Shimon and Leah share a mother. So then what happens is the following, right? Achotom me'imo shenasa achiv me'aviv. She marries his brother from his father, which is permitted because they share nothing. They just share a brother, but they don't share any genetics, right? They don't have the same mother or the same father. So Leah and Reuven in this case get married, right? And then of course Reuven dies. So then Shimon can't do Yibam, right? So let's read it. And then there's a third brother. Then Levi is born, Umeit. And then Shimon dies. So then then Reuven dies. Tityabim, Hoba Matzah Beheter, right? Because since at the time that he was born, Levi was born, she was married to someone she's allowed to be married to. And so maybe then you should have Yibam there too. Well, of course that's not the case. Because Isur Achoto Leichanasa. Still, it's his sister, right? The sister Isur has not gone away. It says, well, why don't you say the same thing here? Hachanavi Isur Achiv Shal Yaba Olamo Leichanasa, right? Meaning the fact that, again, in our case, Reuven dies, right, and his wife is Eshet Achiv, is the brother of a wife to Levi. Levi was not born yet, so Levi has no heter from Yibam. The fact that Shimon did Yibam and married her, and then Levi was born, what happened to the Isser that existed before Shimon did Yibam, right? There's an Isser of Eshet Achiv. Where does that go away? How can that disappear just because Shimon married her? We're asking the same thing. Like, why would you don't say other Isurim go away because there's permitted marriage? Says the Gemara, well, because there's a huge difference between the Isser of Eshet Ach and the Isser of every other Erva. And the difference is that the Torah gives you very specific circumstances in which Eshet Ach can be permitted through Yibam, right? Hi Isura Deletle Hetera, the Isser of a sister there's no circumstance in which a person can marry their sister. But Hi Isura de Itle Hetera, the Isser of Eshet Ach fundamentally has a heter in Yibam. And so since it has a heter in Yibam, we know it goes away in some circumstances. And that's why Rabbi Shimon will extend that and say that it goes away also if the brother was married permittedly, right? Shimon was married through Yibam at the time that Levi was born. And since Shimon was married, she's no longer, quote unquote, the wife or the Yevamah of Reuven. And that's the explanation.
This case, what does it matter if they were half brothers or not?
So we keep discussing this over and over. Just it's one of the themes in our Masechet. But the principle is that really it only matters if your brother's from a father. Yibam only goes after.
So the fact that they were half brothers is not relevant really to the
Right.
final.
Not relevant. We're going to ask, actually, even today, we're going to ask some questions. Maybe it should only be a full brother, but the reality is that it's really, I mean, the Torah is pretty clear that it has to do with Yerusha, as we're going to say. And Yerusha goes after, it has absolutely no implication whether they share a mother, right? Continues the mission. Now, it's going to get a little easier, so don't give up. This mission is a little easier. Fail, of course, but it's a little easier. Lal Amru Yevamot. And he said a rule. We love rules, because rules always have exceptions, right? So whenever you say a rule, you're setting it up for the exception. But the rule they said was, Kol Shehi Isur Erva, anytime that a woman falls to a brother for a potential yibum, but she's prohibited to marry him because there's an erva, right? Because she's his mother-in-law, let's say, or his daughter, even, any of these cases, then Lo Chaletzet Lo Mityabemet. He has no relation to her. He doesn't do chalitza, he doesn't do yibum, it just cancels the whole thing because there's an erva. However, if it's Isur Mitzvah, Isur Kedusha, if she is prohibited to him, not because of an erva, meaning it's not Shimon's daughter, but it's a prohibition through a mitzvah or through a Kedusha. We'll see in a minute what those prohibitions are. But these are sort of extra, not regular rayot, but extra mitzvot, extra Kedusha. Then you do chalitza and not yibum. You're not allowed to marry her because there's a prohibition. We'll see what it is in a second. But you don't get off for free, and you gotta do chalitza. If achoto shehi yevimta, if a person has a sister who is the sister of an erva, this is how we understand it eventually, who becomes his yivama, right? Meaning, let's say, remember we had this case before. Two brothers married two sisters, right? So one of them. One second. No, that's not the case. So yeah. So two brothers married two sisters, and there's a third brother. And those two brothers die. So now the third brother has two women who he's supposed to yibum to, but they're sisters. So remember, he can't marry both, obviously, because it's a prohibition. So we talked yesterday about what happens. We talked about maybe if one happens then the other, the zika. But according to our Mishnah, we're assuming that there's no zika, that they're both fall to him. He can't marry either one. And the reason he can't marry either one is because since there is some level of connection to the responsibility of yibum, and the other one is considered to be the sister of someone who he's already connected to. So achot zekukato, the sister of someone who he's connected to. And that's true about both, right? Either one becomes a zekuka, and the other one's achot zekukato. So says our Mishnah, yocholetzet, where am I? No, achotashi yivimta, choletzet o mityabemet. We're going to see in the Gemara what this means, but it says here that you can. Did I just take a line? No. You can do chalitza or yibum. Isur mitzvah. Now, what is isur mitzvah? When we said there's prohibitions that are not regular rayot, they are prohibition by a mitzvah. Those are called shniot midivrei sofrim. We're going to see probably in tomorrow's stuff. We won't get there. That the rabbis added a whole category of prohibited relationships. The Torah says a person can't sleep with a woman and her daughter and her granddaughter. The rabbis added another layer of prohibitions on top of that. For example, great granddaughter, and we'll get there. Or great grandmother, or a person can't sleep. We'll see these cases. The person can sleep with his father's wife, right? But what about his mother's father's wife? So that's not prohibited in the Torah. But the Chachamim added that prohibition. So grandmother, grandfather's wife, right? So the only prohibition in the Torah is a father's wife, even if it wasn't someone's mother. But a father's wife is added in the Divrei Sofrim, Midrabanan, and a mother's father's wife is also added. Anyways, we'll get to these all tomorrow. These are called shniot, they're second level relationships, okay? And they're prohibited Midrabanan, not Midoraita. And what are Divrei Sofrim? What are Isur Kedusha? Things that are prohibited because they're not holy. That's things like Amanah, Kohen Gadol. If there's a prohibition, a Kohen Gadol has to marry a woman who's never been widowed, right? That's not an Isur Karet, but it's an Isur Lav, and it's because of Kedusha, because the Kohen Gadol is supposed to be very holy. Or Grusha v'Chalutza, the Kohen Hedyot, or that a Kohen Hedyot can't marry a woman who's divorced or has had Chalitza. Or Mamzeret v'Netina l'Yisrael, right? A person's not allowed to marry a Mamzer. That's not an Isur Karet, it's an Isur Lotase. Okay, and Netin is, we think of Netinim as being in the same category as a Mamzer. Again, we'll discuss all these things. Nitinim, if you recall from Tanakh, they were non-Jews who came and fooled Yehoshua into saying we want to convert. They didn't really want to convert. They were just trying. They lied. They said they were from far away. And they wanted to convert, and Yeshua accepted them. Remember, if they had come from nearby, Yeshua had to kill them. He wouldn't accept their conversion. But they fooled him, and he accepted them. And then he got angry at them. He said they could never marry into the Kahal. So we treat them like mamzerim. And the same thing is true about Abat Yisrael and Tinu Mamzer. So all these cases are a prohibition. In these cases, you do chalitza, not yibum. Right? Let's say the brother was married to a mamzeret, right? And the brother died, and Shimon doesn't have to marry, is not allowed to marry a mamzeret, right? The woman who's a mamzer, but he does chalitza to her. And we'll see why in the Gemara, because you would think he should marry her, because asay dochelotas, right?
Some of these are biblical prohibitions, right?
Yeah, but they're not correct, right? They're not erva.
They're not in like the parshiot of like.
They're almost all biblical, correct? They're almost all biblical. The shniot are not, the kedusha is. Says Gemara now, klala tu yimai. Whenever you say there's a rule, what are you including? So Amar from our papa, la tu yitzarat islandit. If you recall, we talked about many women, right? Ruvain dies, and his wife falls to Shimon. So if she's an erva, Shimon doesn't marry her, doesn't do chalitza, doesn't do yibam. But what if she's prohibited to Shimon from yibam or chalitza because she's unable to have children? She's an island. Recall that we said that a woman who's unable to have children does not fall to yibam, because the whole point of yibam is to have a child and keep the name alive. If she is medically known definitively never to be able to have children, there's no yibam. So that's included in our Mishnah, because not only is there no yibam, there's no chalitza, because she never falls to the whole thing, and her tzara would be pater. So that's what we're including. Tzarat island, kidrav asi. And some say the opposite, that in fact we're excluding the tzarat islands. We're arguing with Rav Asi. Ikadami, koshi surah isur ervahu di asira tzarata, right? We're talking about anyone who's asur because they're an erva. Now, an islandate is not an erva, right? There's nothing wrong with her as in a rayot. There's something wrong with her from reproduction, but it's not an isur erva. It's a technical sort of issue. So because we're stressing the word erva, it's saying koshi surah isur ervahu di asira tzarata. Wherever the woman can't fall to yibam because she's an erva, tzara is prohibited. Halo isira isur erva, but if it's just a prohibition that's not an erva, it's because of a technicality, then tzarata lo asira. And what's that telling you? It's telling you unlike Ravasi. So that's the point of the Mishnah. So depends on your framing, but it could be either proving Ravasi or against Ravasi. Now we continue and we said achotoshi yivimta, you do chalitz or yibam. That's why well achotot deman. I don't get it. She's an achoto of which prohibition? I mean the sister, right? So again, sorry, I didn't explain the case very well in the Mishnah. Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. Okay, they both die, and their sisters fall to Levi. So in a regular circumstance, Levi would not do yibam to either sister, because since he's connected to both, he can't do yibam to either one. But if one of the sisters was his daughter, he's the other one also his daughter. If one of the sisters was his mother-in-law, let's say, it's chamuta, then he can't marry her anyways. And so then he does yibam to the other sister. Because since one sister never fell to him, it's not like they're not sisters who both are zakuk to him. One never came into the picture because she was an erva to him. So then in that circumstance, he can marry and do yibam to the other sister. Okay, that was what the Mishnah was saying. It says the Gemara, achoto deman. I don't get a sister. Why couldn't he marry the other sister? Elaim with Isra mitzvah, because she's an Isra mitzvah, she's a shniot, she's a great aunt. Then kivan dimidoraita ram yikame, since it's only midrabanan in Isra mitzvah, and he can marry her midoraita. I don't think he's allowed to then do yibam to the other sister. Pagam achotos achotzikukato, because by marrying the other sister, it should be the sister of someone who's zakuk to him. Ella achotod isur erva. It's the case that I just described. Now, one sister is an Isser Erva, is again his mother-in-law or his aunt or some relationship that he can't marry, can't sleep with. The other sister is not his mother-in-law, right? So he can marry her, there's no problem. So there, because one does not fall to him, the other one is chayav in yibam or chalitza, and he can even marry her. Okay. And continues the Gemara, Isur mitzvot or shniot, right? When we say a prohibition that's min mitzvah, that means the rabbinic prohibitions of shniot. So Amai Karele Isser Mitzvah. So why do we use the word Isser Mitzvah? Amar Baya, because Mitzvah Lishma Divrei Chachamim, right? Because the source of this is that there's a commandment to listen to the Chachamim, meaning the Chachamim have the ability to add on takanot and gzerot, And the reason we listen to them is because we have a commandment to listen to the Chachamim, but it's not a lo taseh. The Torah never says don't marry your grandmother's husband, your grandfather's wife, sorry. But it's an Isur midrabanan to listen to a mitzvah to listen to the Chachamim. Isur Kedusha, he said the prohibitions of Kedusha, of holiness, are things like Kohen Gadol to an Almanah, or a Kohen Hadyot to a divorcee. Amai Karele Isur Kedusha. Why do you call those Isur Kedusha? Because the Torah obviously summates the whole Isur of Kohanim of Kedoshim Yiyule Loheim. We're having a few weeks. You should be Kadosh. And so the principles of Kohanim not marrying or Kohen Gadol, not marrying certain women, are because they're supposed to be on a different level of Kedusha. Tanya, now in fact we learned in a brighter Rabbi Yehuda Machlif. Rabbi Yehuda switched the words in the Mishnah. And he said Isur Mitzvah is in fact the Kohanim. Another Kohen Gadol, Chalitza Kohen Kushav, Chalitza Kohen Hadyot. Amai Karele Isur Mitzvah, because it says at the end of the rules of the Kohanim, Eila HaMitzvot, and it summates, these are all the mitzvot that the Kohen has to listen to. So therefore it uses the word mitzvah to summate that. Isur Kedusha are shniyot midivrei sofrim. And when the Mishnah says the prohibitions that make you holier, that's the things that the rabbis added. Amai Karele Isur Kedusha, Amar Abaya, because, very famous principle, Kol HaMikayim Divrei Chachamim Nikra Kadosh. Anyone who listens to the rabbis is called holy. Because Rav, what is that talking? You're saying, like, basic is not listening to the rabbis. If you listen to the rabbis, you're called kadosh. Amalei Rava, I don't get it. Someone who doesn't listen to the chachamim, he's not holy. Rasha lo mikri, you would call him a rasha, right? If you reject the words of the chachamim. Alama Rava, very famous words in the Mefarshim, kadesh atzmecha b'mutar lecha. The word kedusha has the implication of you are separating yourselves from something that you really theoretically could do. And so whenever you add, not whenever, but sometimes when you add levels of prohibition, that's called adding kedusha, and that's why the prohibitions of the chachamim that extend, they're called shniyot, second level relations, those are called isur kedusha. Now,
But they're none of them arbitrary. They're kind of just extensions of.
They are extensions. We're going to see them, but yes, each one has a rationale. It's basically either one layer over, or it extends it from male to female. Because, for example, you're not allowed to marry, a person's not allowed to sleep with their father's wife. There's no prohibition in sleeping with your mother's wife, right? Because that was not a rabbinic concept.
Your mother's wife?
Correct. So there's no prohibition in sleeping with your mother's wife. But remember,
so lesbians or what?
No, so obviously there's no wife. But the point is that, remember, all prohibitions extend through nodes, right? The prohibition of sleeping with a father's wife goes through a father's wife, right?
That's your grandmother.
No, well, not your grandmother, sorry, but your grandfather's wife.
Right.
Your grandfather's wife is your grandmother.
No, she didn't necessarily give birth to your father, right?
Okay, so you remarried.
Right, you slept with her, it's grandfather's wife. But the thing is, a father's wife comes through a father's wife prohibition. We extend that. But since there's no prohibition of a mother's wife, because there's no such thing in the Torah, there's no concept of a mother's father's wife. Because, there's no, so where does that ever come from? You understand? It can't. The mother's father is only related to you through the mother. So understand. Anyways, the Gemara will talk about this, but that's shniyot. It is prohibited. Don't go home anyone yet. But that's only, it's only shniyot. Okay, that's some of the shniyot. The same thing is true. Just for example, the same thing is true about a person's daughter, right?
Right, I know that one is famously omitted for some reason, right?
Anyways, we'll get to these cases probably tomorrow and over the next few days. Says the Gemara though, what about an almanat to a kohen gadol? Now, if you think about it, remember a kohen gadol has very specific responsibilities of who they can marry. The first one is that they have to marry someone who's not divorced, not widowed, sorry, or divorced certainly, but not widowed. But remember, the Torah also says about a kohen gadol, betula ba'ama yikach leisha. It has to be a virgin. She can't have slept with someone else before. Okay, most of the time, a person who's widowed has already slept with someone else. Not always, right? Because a person could be widowed before they consummate their marriage. They could do kiddushin, and then they're married, in all regards, and then be widowed. So they're still a betula, but they're already an almanah, right? So a kohen gadol has a lo taseh and an aseh. The lo taseh is don't marry an almanah, right? And the aseh is marry a betula. So says the Gemara, when our Mishnah said that you have to do chalitza if a woman is an almanah the kohen gadol, right? Again, Ruvain marries a woman and he dies. His wife falls to Shimon, but Shimon happens to be the kohen gadol, right? So does Shimon do chalitza? Yes, but he doesn't do yibum. But it's not an erva, right? Meaning he doesn't just let her go for free with nothing. So says the Gemara, why is that? Kapasik Vitani, you just simplified. You said any almanah to kohen gadol. Lo shna min hanisuin, lo shna min hanerusin. It doesn't matter whether this almanah has married someone with nisuin and therefore stuck with them, so she's no longer a betula, or whether it's min hanerusin, in which case you assume there was no sexual relations. So now I don't understand why. Bishlam min hanisuin. I get if that they've already been married. If Ruvain and Eshet Ruvain already consummated their marriage. Then when she falls to Shimon the Kohen Gadol, he can't do yibum. Why can't he do yibum? Because lo taseh, aseh v'lo taseh, right? It's both an aseh that he can't marry her because she's not a virgin, and it's a lo taseh because she's an almanah. And lo ein aseh of yibum docha lo taseh v'aseh. It doesn't make any sense to say that one aseh of yibum is docha aseh and a lo taseh of almanah the Kohen Gadol. But if it was only min ha'erisin, if she had never slept with Ruvain, then she's still a betula. And so the only prohibition of marrying the Kohen Gadol is a lo taseh. Then it's a lo taseh grado. It's only a lo taseh. So why not you say yavo aseh v'yitchel lo taseh? Beautiful question. And you can ask the same question about all these lo tasehs, right? If there's only a lo taseh, say grusha the Kohen Hedyot, right? Why can't he do yibum if there's an aseh to do yibum? A lo taseh, don't marry a divorcee, a grusha. So what? Yavo aseh v'yitchel lo taseh. Says Rav Gido Amarav, a very beautiful limud. Amar Kra, Torah says that after they do yibam, after he says he's not going to do yibam, alda yevimto sha'ara, and then they do chalitza. But we're still calling her a yevimto. She'ein tamalom yevimto. We could have said alda sha'ara. We just said yevimto, right, in the previous passage. Because she goes up to the gate. Why do we use an extra word yevimto? Ma tamalom yevimto. Telling you that yesh lecha yevama she'olel chalitza ve'eno olel yibum. There is, in fact, usually there's an option, right? You can do yibum or chalitza, but there is one case or one group of cases in which there's no option. She only can do chalitza. And what's the case? This case. If there's a lo taseh that prohibits him from marrying her, she doesn't go off without chalitza because she can still, in theory, do it. But in that case, the Torah, Midoraita, is telling you just do chalitza. This is a scenario where you can only do chalitza, right? The ezuzu chayve lavin. It's only in chayve lavin. They only do chalitza. Ask the Gemara. I don't get it. Maybe everything we learned till now in the Masechet is wrong, right? Up till now we've assumed we've said from Sukkim that if a person's daughter falls to him to yibam, he doesn't marry her, right? That's hopefully obvious, but it's the truth. But it's not obvious, right? Why not asay docha lo taseh? So we talked about this last week, just remember. But why don't you say that he should do chalitza? Maybe that's what the Torah is telling you. So sure, you can't marry your daughter, but you can do chalitza to her, right? So maybe ema chayve kritut. Maybe if you're chayve karet, you still have to do chalitza. How do you know it's only that chayve kritut you go off with nothing, and chayve lavin you have to do chalitza? Maybe both of them need it, or only kritut. Well, no, because on Makra, the pasuk says im lo yachbotze ish lekachat. If the husband or the man doesn't want to marry her, he does ibum. He does chalitza. But obviously, a person doesn't have a choice if he wants to marry his daughter, right? Hachafetz miyabein. So therefore, we have a principle: kol ha'olel yibum olel chalitza. Anyone in which you could have done yibum, then you could do chalitza. But kol she'ein olel yibum ein olel chalitza. So therefore, since a person's daughter or any other chiyat karet, you can't do yibum, you don't do chalitza. This is more where you're running around in circles. Right? Because what about the chayve lavin? Right? What about the kohen gadol? If you're telling me you can't do yibam, you can only do chalitza, he falls out of that principle. Ihachi chayve lavin nami. That's where we'll Rabbi Rachmani yivimto. The Torah says in one case you do chalitza, not yibam. Again, the same question we asked earlier. Umara ita. Right? Why are you saying that one pasuk which says chalitza and yibam are connected? If you have one, you have the other, and if you don't have one, you don't have the other. That's a chiyav karet. And then another pasuk says only do chalitza, don't do yibam. That's a chayav lav. How do you know? Well, it makes a lot of sense because think about it. If a person marries a woman who's prohibited to him the chayve lav here, He's over a lo tasa. He gets malkut, he's in trouble, blah, blah, blah. But it's still, the marriage is consummated, right? We usually paskin, not like Rabbi Akiva, that in chayve lavin tafsi kiddushin. The kiddushin achieves itself. So it says the word mistavra, it's logical that chayve lavin tafsi b'kiddushin. By chayv lav, where kiddushin, although it's prohibited, it actually consummates, right? So there you would say, there's some connection to chalitza. Chayve kritut, which lo tafsi b'kiddushin, a person goes and marries his daughter, there's no kiddushin, it's not a marriage, you don't need a get, right? You need something else, but you don't need a get. So the chayve kritut, which are not tafsi kiddushin, therefore there's no chalitza and no yid. Now, Maktiv Rava asked the following question. Continuing the Mishnah, and it said, Isur mitzvah, Isur kedusha, right? Then in the Mishnah, these prohibitions of Isur, this is a bright sorry. If let's say a person is an Isur mitzvah, right? Let's say Shimon is the Kohen Gadol, okay? And Ruvain dies, and Ruvain has, well, it's back. Let's say Shimon's a Kohen, right? And his brother Ruvain, who turns out was also a Kohen, dies. And his brother leaves 3 wives behind, and one of them is a divorcee, is a Gusha. Okay? So Shimon is not supposed to marry her because she's an Isser Lotas, right? He could do chalitza to her, or he can marry one of the other women, presumably. But says the Braita, if it's an Isur Mitzvah, Isur Kedusha, Ba'aleha, right? If Shimon sleeps with her, he's not supposed to. O chalatzla, or he does chalitza to her, niftarat tzarata. The other wives are permitted because this Yibam has been consummated. Now again, it says the Gemara, if there's a pasuk that says that you're not allowed to do Yibam in this case, you can only do Chalitza. So the fact that he slept with her it's not Yibam. It's an illicit relationship. It's not a fulfillment of Yibam. So why does it get the tzarot off the hook, right? If he slept with her, why does that pater the tzara? So that was the question that Rava asked. But then before Rava got an answer, he thought of his own answer. He thought, oh, I didn't really read the Mishnah so clearly. Because it could be litztadim katan. It could be saying 2 different things. That ba'aleha, if he slept with her, that's not Yisur mitzvah, right? Meaning that's the shniot, which are only midrabanan. And there, if you do sleep with her, it's not min haTorah. So you fulfilled it even though you weren't supposed to. Chalatzla is referring to Isur Kedusha. So it's not clear for sure that the Isur Kedusha, which is the Kohen Gadol and probably the Kohen, which is Midoraita according to this Pshat, would also be the halacha in that case. But Mativ Rav, I have a question from another Braita. The Braita, this is what Tosefta says. Now, if you recall, we're going to get to this actually in a few parshiot. There are other relationships that are prohibited min Torah that are not because of family, right? And some of the examples we're going to talk now are there's a bunch of circumstances where a man or a woman, but a man in this case, cannot have children. They're called Petsua Daka, which means that their testicles are crushed, that they're damaged, so they can't produce sperm, or Krutch Shofcha, which usually means that their penis is cut off. But again, we're going to discuss what that means exactly. But they cannot have a child, let's say, or Sris Adam, which means a man who's sterile, but sterile, not a man. A person, it is a man, but a person who's sterile through the actions of an Adam, meaning not naturally, but they took some poison or they took some medication, and they are sterile. And don't worry, this is a whole parak later on in around 2 months. All of these people, and it says about all of them, lo yavo b'kahal, right? They're not supposed to get married. So, or a zaken, or let's say someone who's very elderly, who clearly can't have children, 90 years old. Oh, chotzino miyamim. We say, it doesn't matter, they can do chalitza or yibam. The fact that they can never have children doesn't affect it. The mitzvah of yibam is there. You can do chalitza or yibam even with one of these people. Again, we'll discuss this all later. But the point we get from here, and well, let's read the Braita. Ketzad, what's the circumstance? Major. Let's say this person dies. L'hem achim, l'hem nashim. Right? They have wives and they have brothers. Let's say one of the brothers did ma'amar. Remember, ma'amar is the kiddushin midrabanan of a Yevamot in one of their wives or their widows, or nitnu get, or choltzu, or they did a get or chalitza. Ma sha'asa asu. If what they did is done, if in ba'alu kanu, or if they sleep with them, then they've done they've consummated the yibum. But if they are made to achim, right? Let's say the brothers die. So the surviving brother is the one who is not allowed to get married, who's a serious, who's sterile, right? Made to achim, the amdu haim. So they, meaning any of these prohibited, not all prohibited, but people who can't have children, let's say, some are prohibited, some are not. So Cain is not prohibited. But say they get up, they do ma'amar, they do kiddushin, or natnu get, or shechotsu, or they do chalitza. In all of these cases, masha asa asu, it's done, meaning they fulfilled the act. Ba'alu kanu. If this man, let's say, again, he's a krot shavcha, he's not allowed to marry a Jewish woman, the kahal. He goes out and does yibam, it's yibam. It's done. It's a good thing. However, it's not a good thing, but it's fulfilled the thing. But asur the kaiman, but he can't stay married to her, right? He can't stay in that relationship. Mishum shenemar lo yavo b'tzua daka b'kal Hashem. It says that b'tzua daka should not come into the kahal. So basically, it's a lotase, right? Ruvain is a b'tzua daka. Shimon died. Ruvain did yibam to Shimon's wife, to Shimon's widow. So says the Braita, it fulfills yibam, but you can't stay married because it's a prohibition.
But what should be the difference between this case and the Ilanit?
It's the same thing. It's almost the same thing, but obviously, well,
no,
it's not the same. I take it back at all.
Ilanit, if she's sterile,
There's no yibum at all.
Right, but if he's sterile, he can still do yibum.
So,
you know what I mean?
Correct. So it's a good question. In theory, he could, but he's not allowed to sleep with her. But yes, he can do yibum, or if he's old, let's say.
No, right, but it says he did yibum, he fulfilled it yibum.
So we darshan it from a pasuk before, implying that she has to be the one who can carry it. But remember, it was machloket. It wasn't one of not everyone agreed with the title. Remember, that's what we quoted today. But according to Rabasi, yes, we darshan it from a pasuk that she has to be able to carry a child. But so again, the case here is he does yibum even though he's not allowed to marry her.
Right.
So the Braita says the yibum counts, right? Meaning potters everyone else. But he's got to divorce her now because he can't stay married to her. He can't sleep with her. Okay? Ask the Gemara, according to Rava, if this is an Isra Midoraita, remember, to sleep with her. And what the Torah basically says is that where there's a lotase not to sleep with a woman, you can never do yibum. You only do chalitza. So if that's the case, why does his yibum count? He's going against the Torah. It's like just a prohibited erva, right? So ask the Gemara, if what Rava said is true, that Chayve Lavin are an Isser Doraita, then the Chalitza Ramya, then she only falls to Chalitza and not the Yibum. The Yibum Lo Ramya, right? So then it doesn't make any sense. Not Rava, right? It should go for Chalitza and not for Yibum. There's no concept of Yibum. So in Balu Amai Kano, Ella says, well, you're right. It's wrong. It's a mistake. The whole thing we said is wrong. There's no concept of Yibum of Chalitza without Yibum. Says Rava, so why in the world doesn't a Kohen Gadol marry a woman who's a divorcee, a widow, to fulfill the mitzvah taseh of Yibum to be docha the lo taseh? Says Rava, look, the reason is because even if there's only one lo taseh, still there's really an aseh and a lo taseh. Amana min ha'iris inami aseh v'lo taseh. A Kohen Gadol marrying a widow who's still a betula is also an asay and a lo taseh. There's a separate asay, be kadosh. So that basically every prohibition related to Kohanim is an asay and a lo taseh. Be kadosh, which is an asay. Lo yavo, don't marry an almana. Almana lo, right, lo yikach. So it's an asay and a lo taseh. Okay, well that helps for Kohanim. But what about a mamzeret from the tina ma'it lamina? What about a mamzer or a mamzeret? Right? There it's a lo taseh to marry a mamzeret, but that's the aseh of Yibum should be docha that. Well, there's really also an aseh, because it says you should be holy. So basically saying you all Bnei Yisrael should be holy, that's basically a positive commandment, do all the mitzvot. So basically we're de facto adding a positive commandment. It says the Gemara, that's ridiculous. Yachi kol Torah kula nami. Right? They said about every single lo taseh in the Torah. So there's no principle of asay docha lo taseh, because every lo taseh has a
the whole category.
Correct.
The whole category is gone then.
Correct. If that's true, Kol Torah kulanami aseh v'lo taseh. Dichtiv hikadishtem. This is where, okay, you're right. We were going a little too far. Amar Rava, I got a new answer. Says Rava, Gzeira almana min ha'erasin atu almana min ha'nisuin. It's a Gzeira. Min ha'Torah, a Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow who's already slept with another man because she's not a Betula. Because she's both an Aseh of marrying a Betula and a Lot Aseh of marrying a widow. And therefore, you can't do Yibam in that case. And we got confused. People will think, oh, we'll do Yibam for an Almanah. We're afraid if you do Yibam from an Almanah, min ha'erasin, you'll do it in the other case. So one is min Torah and one is midrabanan. It's a gzera, which is a very reasonable gzera, right?
Yeah.
Amanah min hanisuin because of amanah min ha'erasin. I'm sorry, amanah min ha'erasin because of amanah min hanisuin.
Yeah.
Remember, what about mamzeret finitina?
Yeah.
What about a mamzeret? Ma'ikul and meimar. Well, they're gzera makom mitzvah to shlova makom mitzvah. We're afraid if we let you do yibam to a woman who's a mamzeret, you'll come to think you can marry a mamzeret no matter what. Why you would come to think that is bizarre, but anyways, that's what we say. Elamiata, what about Ishta Chivmi Aviv? I don't get it. Well, maybe you should never do Yibam to your brother from your father, because you might think, Zera Mishum Ishta Chivmi Imo. You might think, oh, no. If I do Yibam to my brother's wife, from my father, I can do Yibam to my brother's wife from my mother, which you can't, because it's not really your brother. No one will make that mistake, because Yibam Benachala Talarachman. Torah very clearly connects Yibam to the concept of Yerusha, right, of inheritance. And everybody knows inheritance only goes after the father. Made the idea that it only goes after the father. So what about Isha She'ein lo banim? Well, I have another idea. A woman who has no children, Tosfos thinks this means she had children and they died, but at the time of her death, she doesn't have any children. You shouldn't do Yibam, because Gzeira Mishum Isha She'ish lo banim. You might think, oh, I'm doing Yibam to this woman who has no children, but she used to have children. Maybe I have to Yibam to a woman who does have children, right? This is where everyone knows that that's ridiculous. That the Banim Tala Rachmana made the idea. Everybody knows that the whole concept of Yibam has to do with children. So if you don't have children, that's where you do Yibam. But if you have children, you don't do Yibam. What about I don't know. Maybe you should do Yibam for a brother who's normal, because Gzeira you might come to think I can do it even when the brother was born after the first brother died, right? Meaning, again, if you're really so worried about gzerot, you could think of so many cases where you have to make these gzerot. This is where, yeshiva talarachmana, that no. The Torah very clearly says it has to do with them living together. Yeshvu achim yachdav, right? Your brothers live together. And so made the idea that you know the difference. Says the Gemara, well, what about kol hanashim lo tityavma? I have another idea. Get rid of Yibam entirely. Why? Zera mishum ailanit, right? As Chana was pointing out, you can't do Yibam if the woman can't have children. So if people might not realize that, right? They might say, well, I saw him doing Yibam for a woman last week. I'll do Yibam from this first person. If you're so worried about people making mistakes, which we are about another Kohen Gadol, cancel the whole Yibam and only do Chalitza, which obviously is ridiculous. Well, it says in Gemara, lo shchicha. Okay, that's not so common. Well, mamzeret v'netina nami lo shchicha, right? And it's really just a bantering almost, right? The mamzeret also, meaning, why can't you do Yibam to a woman who's a mamzeret, right? So you can't marry her because it's a lot aseh. Yibam is an aseh. Why doesn't the aseh dochel a lot aseh? So you said, oh, well, it's a gzera. We're afraid if, this woman is I guess unfortunately it was a time where a woman had a title, you knew what she was. But she was a mamzeret. If we allow you to do Yibam, people will come to think, oh, you can marry a mamzeret. So you can say that about anything, right? Yibam involves all kinds of things. It says where it's too far-fetched. It's not a common thing. No one's going to come to think that. El Amar Rava, here's the reason. And this is what we're going to stick with, I think, at least for now. Gzera biyah rishona atu biyah shniya. The problem with all of these is a gzera midrabana, which is yavo aseh v'yochadocha lo taseh. You're allowed to marry a woman who's prohibited to you, not from karet, right? That's an erva. But everybody else you can marry for Yibam, because the aseh of Yibam is docha lo taseh of Kohen Gadol, of divorce, of grusha, of mamzeret. It's all permitted. The problem is that the Torah permits you to sleep with them once to do Yibam. Once you've done Yibam, you're no longer allowed to stay married to this person, because every act of intercourse is a prohibition, right? And so the only thing that's permitted is that first act. And therefore they said, don't marry her, because you're going to end up living with her in sin. And so therefore they prohibited the whole thing because of the second one. So you do chalitza, right? So the whole thing is a gzera because the biyah rishana, the first act of intercourse, atu biyah shniya. And in fact, that's what the Braita says. Tayanami hachi, the Braita says, in ba'alu, if a person did yibum to any of these people, kanu, it actually works, but the biyah rishona, asur the kaiman, but biyah shniya. But you can't marry them and stay with them for the biyah shniya. I mean, you got to do it and then divorce them. Hadar amar Rava became Ravashi lavno. In fact, later on, Rava said, none of this really is a good question. The Amri, the Amri Reish Lakish, in fact, what Reish Lakish said is, Kol makom shatam motza, aseh v'lo taseh. Says Reish Lakish, I think you're missing the whole point here, which is, there is generally a principle in the Torah that an aseh is docha lo taseh. But that's only in a circumstance where it's unavoidable. You have to do this lo taseh in order to fulfill the aseh. You have to sleep with this woman in order to fulfill the mitzvah. But by Yibam, none of that is true. Because by Yibam, there's another out. You can do chalitza. And since you can do chalitza, you're never allowed to do Yibam of an isser, of a woman who's prohibited to you. Because you might as well just take the other out. So it's true naseh is docha lo taseh, but that's only if it's unavoidable, right? You have to, on Shabbos, do whatever. But here, it's avoidable. You can get rid of the aseh, you can fulfill the mitzvah of Yibam, without doing the lo taseh, by doing chalitza. So said Reish Lakish, whenever you have a mitzvah, a motzah aseh, lo taseh, im ata yachol lekayim shnehem mutav. If you can fulfill both, meaning you can fulfill the aseh without going against the lo taseh, you should do that. Im lav yavo aseh v'yitcha lo taseh. Hachanami efshar b'chalitza. In the kayim aseh, the lo taseh. Right. So here too, it's efshar b'chalitza, in which case you can fulfill both the aseh of Yibam by doing chalitza and the lo taseh of the lo taseh, right? So therefore, says the Gemara, this is really the rationale for Rava at this point, which is Rava is relying on Reish Lakish. Rava is saying the reason that you are not allowed to do Yibam to a divorced woman, if a person's a Kohen, even though it's just the lo taseh, don't sleep with them. The aseh of Yibam should go against that. But the reason the aseh of Yibam does not go against that is because of Reish Lakish's principle. That aseh is only docha lo taseh when the aseh is unavoidable, when the lo taseh is unavoidable to fulfill the aseh. Since here you could do chalitza, the aseh is not docha lo taseh. That's Rava's answer. Says the Gemara, it sounds really great, but it can't be true. Because remember, we said in the Braita, we quoted 3 lines ago, in ba'alu kanu, that if you did it, it works. And according to Rava, that doesn't make any sense. According to Rava, there's no mitzvah, right? You can't do it. So why, according to Rava, would in ba'alu kanu to you? That in fact is a question on Rava, and it's not one that we answer, right? Because here, according to Rava, midoraita, you should not be allowed to do Yibam. Because since you can fulfill the mitzvah taseh by doing chalitza, therefore doing Yibam is totally prohibited, and if you do it, it shouldn't count. It should be not part of the mitzvah. And so we are stuck today with not really understanding, according to the Gemara, exactly why you do it, and we probably go back to the first answer, which is Gzera biyah shniya atu biyah rishona, right? That the second biyah is prohibited mid'Rabbanan because you can't do the first biyah. So the reason you don't do Yibam for all these people is because since you can't sustain the marriage, we don't want you to start the marriage. If you did it, it would work, but we don't want you to do it. We'll stop here at the 2 dots, and I think Dov will pick it up tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stan.
Thanks, Ali.
What a brain twister.